The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the empty office break room as I sat staring at my untouched yogurt and crackers. Rain streaked the windows overlooking downtown Denver, and the building's heating system clicked and settled around me like an old house full of secrets. At 58, I'd spent the last 12 years eating lunch in this same corner table, watching the seasons change through these same windows. My name is Carol Jenkins, and for over a decade, I'd been the head bookkeeper at Riverside Construction Company, a mid-sized firm that built strip malls and office complexes across Colorado. The work was steady, the pay decent, and my boss, Mr. Richardson, had always treated me fairly until today. The manila envelope sat beside my lunch tray like a coiled snake. Richardson had slid it across my desk at 11:47 a.m. with just 3 words. 24 hours, Carol. His face had been pale, his usual friendly demeanor replaced by something that looked like pity mixed with fear. I hadn't opened the envelope yet. Some instinct told me that whatever was inside would change everything, the way a cancer diagnosis or a house fire changes everything suddenly and completely. The coffee in my thermos had long since grown cold, but I kept my hands wrapped around it anyway, needing something warm in a world that suddenly felt arctic. Through the break room doorway, I could see my desk where I'd balanced books, managed payroll, and tracked expenses for Richardson Construction. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal. The silence pressed against my ears, broken only by the distant sound of construction equipment from the job site next door. 2 weeks earlier, my husband Frank had announced he was taking a consulting job in Phoenix. After 26 years of marriage, Frank's sudden career move had surprised me, but I'd supported his decision. "It's just for 6 months, Carol," he'd explained over dinner in our modest ranch house in Lakewood. "The money's too good to pass up, and it'll set us up nicely for retirement." Frank was a civil engineer, 55 years old, and he'd been between jobs since his previous company downsized. The Phoenix opportunity seemed like a blessing: good pay, temporary assignment, and a chance to rebuild our savings after months of financial stress. "The company's putting me up in corporate housing," Frank had continued, cutting his meatloaf with mechanical precision. "You'll hardly notice I'm gone." But I had noticed. Our phone conversations grew shorter and less frequent. When I asked about his work, Frank's answers became vague. "Just engineering stuff, Carol. Survey work and soil analysis. Pretty boring." The change in Frank's behavior was subtle but persistent. He used to call me every evening at 8 o'clock, our ritual for staying connected during his business trips. Now, days would pass without contact. When I tried calling him, I often got voicemail. "Frank, honey, I just wanted to hear in your voice." I'd leave messages that went unreturned. Last week, I'd finally reached him at what he claimed was his hotel. "Frank, you sound different. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Carol, just tired. This project is more demanding than I expected." "When are you coming home for a visit?" "It's been almost 2 months. Soon, honey, soon." But something in his voice, or maybe something missing from his voice, told me that nothing about Frank's Phoenix assignment was what it seemed. Now, staring at Richardson's envelope, I had the sinking feeling that whatever was inside would explain everything. Too trusting of husband, avoids confrontation, and lets others make major decisions. Strengths: expert with financial records, detail-oriented, loyal, persistent when motivated, hardworking engineer, devoted husband, practical about money, hidden motive, secret relationship, financial desperation, ego damaged by unemployment behavior pattern, evasive, increasingly distant, covers lies with more lies. Carol's neighbor of 8 years, retired postal worker, notices mail patterns and visitors, observes everything. Carol's younger brother, private investigator in Portland. He has been worried about Frank's behavior but stayed quiet. My daily life had developed a comfortable rhythm during Frank's absence. I woke at 6:15 each morning in our 3-bedroom ranch house, made coffee in the kitchen overlooking our small backyard vegetable garden, and drove the same route to Richardson Construction that I'd traveled for 12 years. The office was my second home. I knew every supplier's payment schedule, every contractor's billing habits, and every penny that flowed through the company's accounts. Richardson trusted me completely with the financial operations, often saying I knew the numbers better than he did. Evenings were quieter without Frank. I'd tend to my tomatoes and lettuce, read mystery novels from the library, and work on the crossword puzzles that kept my mind sharp. Weekends meant grocery shopping, housework, and occasional dinners with my neighbor Janet, a widow who'd become a close friend since moving in next door. My peace symbol was Frank's favorite coffee mug, a chipped ceramic piece with "World's Best Engineer" printed in fading letters. I still set it out each morning next to mine, a habit that connected me to our marriage, even when he was hundreds of miles away. The house felt too quiet without Frank's evening news programs and his habit of reading engineering journals at the kitchen table. But I'd adapted to the solitude, even found some peace in it. For the first time in years, I could read without interruption, eat dinner when I wanted, and choose my own television programs. Richardson's envelope threatened to shatter this carefully maintained equilibrium. The first sign something was wrong came when our bank statement arrived 3 weeks ago. I'd always handled our household finances while Frank managed his business accounts, but we shared a joint checking account for mortgage payments and major expenses. The statement showed a wire transfer I didn't recognize, $8,500 sent to something called Southwest Property Management in Phoenix. When I called Frank to ask about it, his explanation was hasty and unconvincing. "It's a security deposit for the corporate housing, Carol. Company policy requires upfront payment for extended stays." $8,000 for a security deposit? It's an expensive property in a nice area. "Don't worry about it. The company will reimburse everything when the project ends." But something about Frank's tone made me save the bank statement instead of filing it away. I'd been a bookkeeper long enough to recognize when financial explanations didn't add up. 2 weeks later, I noticed Frank's cell phone bill had increased dramatically. According to our online account, he was making hundreds of calls and sending thousands of text messages, far more than his work would require. When I mentioned it, during one of our infrequent conversations, Frank became defensive. "The project requires constant communication with the team, Carol, and I've been coordinating with subcontractors. It's part of the job." "Hundreds of calls to the same number?" There was a pause. That's the project manager." Very demanding client. Frank had never been a good liar, and 26 years of marriage had taught me to recognize when he was avoiding the truth. But confronting him directly had never been my strength, and Phoenix felt too far away for a serious conversation. The pieces started falling together when Janet knocked on my door last Sunday evening, holding a piece of mail that had been delivered to her address by mistake. "Carol, honey, this came to my house, but it's addressed to Frank. Looks like important business mail." The envelope was from Phoenix Legal Services, marked confidential, and addressed to Frank at our Lakewood address, not his supposed corporate housing in Phoenix. Inside was a consultation summary for divorce proceedings, listing Frank as the client and requesting documentation of marital assets. My hands shook as I read the legal paperwork. Frank hadn't just taken a temporary job in Phoenix, he'd been planning to leave our marriage permanently. The consulting work might be real, but it was also his exit strategy. The document mentioned equitable distribution of marital property and spousal support obligations. At the bottom was a note about expedited proceedings for out-of-state residents. I sat in my kitchen reading the papers 3 times before the reality sank in. Frank wasn't coming home in 6 months. Frank wasn't planning to come home at all. But divorce papers didn't explain the wire transfer to Southwest Property Management or the excessive phone bills. There were more secrets hidden in Frank's Phoenix adventure, and I was beginning to understand that I'd been living with a stranger for months, maybe years. The next morning, I walked into Richardson Construction with new eyes, wondering what other surprises were waiting for me. I hadn't expected one to be sitting on my desk in a manila envelope. I opened Richardson's envelope in the privacy of my car after work, sitting in the parking garage with rain drumming on the roof. Inside were copies of financial documents that made my blood turn to ice water. Frank hadn't just been planning to leave me, he'd been systematically looting our marriage. The first document was a loan application to Desert Financial Credit Union in Phoenix, listing our Lakewood house as collateral for a $75,000 business loan. Frank's forged signature was next to mine, a signature I'd never made on papers I'd never seen. The second document was worse, a quit claim deed transferring full ownership of our house to Frank Jenkins and Associates, a business entity that apparently didn't include his wife of 26 years. But the most devastating discovery was the last page, a contract with Southwest Property Management for a luxury condo rental in Scottsdale, Arizona. The lease was for two people, Frank Jenkins and someone named Rebecca Torres. Frank didn't just have a secret divorce attorney. He had a secret life, a secret business, and a secret relationship that he'd been funding with our marital assets. Richardson's note was clipped to the documents. Carol Frank approached me 6 months ago about investment opportunities and asked me to verify employment for financial applications. I only learned yesterday that he'd been forging signatures and using company letterhead without permission. I'm sorry, but I had to let you know. He's been lying to both of us. Jim Richardson. The scope of Frank's deception was staggering. While I'd been worrying about his distance and changed behavior, he'd been constructing an entire alternate reality in Phoenix, complete with new business ventures, new housing arrangements, and apparently a new woman. The rain on my car's roof sounded like applause for a performance I'd never known I was watching. That night, I sat in our living room surrounded by 26 years of shared memories, wedding photos, vacation souvenirs, our furniture we'd chosen together, and felt like I was viewing artifacts from someone else's life. The house that I'd thought was our foundation was apparently no longer mine. The marriage that I'd believed was solid was apparently a facade Frank had been planning to abandon for months. The financial security I'd thought we were building together was apparently being redirected to support his new life with Rebecca Torres. I pulled out our photo albums and traced the progression of our relationship, young couple in love, struggling newlyweds, settled married pair building a life together. At what point had Frank decided that this life, this house, this woman wasn't enough anymore? The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the systematic nature of it. This wasn't a midlife crisis or a moment of weakness. Frank had spent months planning his escape, forging documents, creating false businesses, and building a new identity while still sleeping in our bed and eating at our kitchen table. I thought about all the evenings I'd worried about his welfare in Phoenix, all the times I'd encouraged him to take opportunities that would advance his career, all the sacrifices I'd made to support what I thought was our shared future. The coffee mug with "World's Best Engineer" sat on the kitchen counter where I'd left it that morning, waiting for a man who was never coming home to drink from it again. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat in the growing darkness, feeling the weight of secrets that had been kept from me and decisions that had been made without me. Frank had chosen his new life. Now I had to figure out what was left of mine. Tuesday morning, my brother David called from Portland. As a private investigator, David had always been protective of me, but we'd grown apart since our parents died 5 years ago. "Carol, I know this might sound strange, but I need to ask you something. Has Frank been acting differently lately?" "Why do you ask?" "Because I've been getting calls from clients in Phoenix asking about Frank Jenkins. Apparently, he's been representing himself as a licensed private investigator and offering services he's not qualified to provide." My heart sank further. "David, there's something I need to tell you." I explained Richardson's envelope, the forged documents, the secret lease with Rebecca Torres, and the apparent theft of our house as loan collateral. David was quiet for a long moment. "Carol, I've been tracking Frank's activities for 3 weeks. A potential client called me because Frank had contacted them using credentials that looked suspiciously similar to my business licenses. What did you find? Frank's been running multiple scams in Phoenix. The consulting work is real, but he's been inflating his qualifications and charging premium rates for basic engineering services. He's also been selling investment opportunities to other contractors, using your house and Richardson Construction as references for his financial stability. The picture became clearer and more horrifying. Frank wasn't just leaving me, he was using our marriage, our property, and my reputation to fund his criminal activities in another state. David, I need help. I don't know how to handle this. You're not handling it alone anymore. I'm driving down tomorrow, and we're going to fix this before Frank can do any more damage. For the first time since opening Richardson's envelope, I felt a spark of hope mixed with the anger that was finally beginning to surface. David arrived Wednesday afternoon with a briefcase full of documentation and a methodical plan for protecting my interests. As a licensed private investigator, he knew how to trace financial fraud and gather evidence for legal proceedings. First, we secure your assets, David explained, spreading papers across my dining room table. Then we document the fraud. Then we notify the appropriate authorities. We started by reviewing every financial account Frank had access to. The joint checking account showed regular wire transfers to Phoenix, not just the $8,500 I'd noticed, but a pattern of withdrawals totaling over $30,000 in 4 months. He's been systematic about it, David observed. Small enough amounts to avoid triggering automatic alerts, but large enough to fund a significant lifestyle change. David had also investigated Rebecca Torres. She was a real estate agent in Scottsdale who specialized in luxury properties. Her social media profiles showed a lavish lifestyle funded by unclear sources, expensive dinners, designer clothes, and weekend trips that matched the timeline of Frank's mysterious Phoenix project. She may not know Frank is married, David noted, or she may be a willing participant in the fraud. Either way, she's evidence of his intent to permanently relocate. We documented the forged signatures on the loan applications and quit-claim deed. David's expertise in handwriting analysis confirmed what I'd suspected. Frank had practiced my signature extensively before creating the fraudulent documents. This isn't amateur fraud, Carol. Frank planned this for months, maybe longer. Thursday morning, we visited attorney Patricia Valdez, a family law specialist David recommended for her expertise in complex asset protection cases. Mrs. Jenkins, your husband has committed multiple felonies, Miss Valdez explained, after reviewing our evidence. Forgery, identity theft, real estate fraud, and potentially wire fraud if he's used banking systems to transfer funds under false pretenses. Our first priority was protecting the house. Ms. Valdez filed emergency motions to freeze all joint assets and void the fraudulent quit-claim deed. She also contacted Desert Financial Credit Union to report the forged loan application. We'll also need to notify the engineering licensing board in both Colorado and Arizona, she continued. If Frank is misrepresenting his credentials for business purposes, his professional licenses could be suspended. David had been coordinating with law enforcement in Phoenix. Frank's activities had attracted attention from multiple agencies. The FBI was investigating his investment schemes, and local police were tracking complaints from clients who'd paid for services Frank wasn't qualified to provide. The net is closing around him, David told me. But Carol, you need to be prepared for this to get ugly before it gets better. The confrontation came Friday evening when Frank called, unaware that I knew about his Phoenix activities. Carol, honey, I've got some good news about the project timeline. Frank, I need to ask you something directly. Are you planning to come home? There was a pause. Of course I'm coming home. Why would you ask that? Because I found the divorce papers, and the real estate fraud, and Rebecca Torres. The silence on the phone stretched for almost a minute. Carol, I can explain. No, Frank. I'm going to explain. You forged my signature on loan documents using our house as collateral. You created fake business entities to hide assets. You've been running investment scams using my reputation and my employer's credibility. And you've been funding a new life with another woman using money stolen from our marriage. Carol, you don't understand the whole situation. I understand that you're a criminal, Frank. And I understand that you made the choice to destroy our marriage, rather than simply end it honestly. Frank's voice changed, became harder. You can't prove any of this. Actually, I can. David's been investigating your activities for weeks. The FBI is interested in your investment schemes. And Patricia Valdez has already filed motions to protect our assets from further theft. Carol, if you fight me on this, you'll lose everything. Frank, I interrupted, I've already lost everything that mattered. But I'm not going to let you steal what's left. I hung up the phone and immediately called David. It's done, I told him. Frank knows we're on to him. Good, David replied. Now we see what he's really made of. Frank's world collapsed with remarkable speed once the authorities were involved. The FBI's investigation revealed a pattern of fraud that extended far beyond our marriage. Frank had been targeting elderly investors with fake engineering projects and had defrauded multiple clients of substantial amounts. The Arizona State Engineering Board suspended Frank's license pending investigation of his fraudulent credentialing claims. Without professional credentials, his consulting work ended immediately, leaving him stranded in Phoenix without income. Rebecca Torres discovered Frank's marital status when process servers delivered legal papers to their shared condo. According to David's contacts, she immediately ended their relationship and evicted Frank from the luxury apartment he'd been paying for with my money. The fraudulent loan application triggered a criminal investigation by Desert Financial Credit Union. Frank's attempt to use our house as collateral for unauthorized business ventures constituted multiple felonies under Colorado law. Richardson Construction fired Frank from any future consulting opportunities and cooperated fully with law enforcement. His professional reputation in Colorado was completely destroyed when the engineering community learned about his fraudulent activities. Frank's investment victims in Phoenix filed a class action lawsuit seeking recovery of their stolen funds. The civil judgments would ensure that even if Frank avoided prison time, he'd be financially liable for damages for years to come. The divorce proceedings became straightforward once the fraud evidence was presented. Frank's criminal activities voided any claim to marital assets, and his legal troubles made him eager to settle quickly rather than face prolonged court battles. 8 months later, I was sitting in my kitchen in my house, reading the morning paper and drinking coffee from a new favorite mug. The legal battles were over. Frank was serving 18 months in federal prison, and I was slowly rebuilding a life I actually wanted to live. Richardson had promoted me to office manager, recognizing both my financial expertise and my grace under pressure during the fraud investigation. The salary increase helped offset the costs of legal fees and house repairs that had been deferred during our financial struggles. David and I had grown closer through the crisis. He visited monthly now, and we'd started planning family holidays for the first time since our parents' deaths. Having an ally who understood the importance of truth and justice had reminded me that not all relationships were built on deception. Janet, my neighbor, had become more than a friend. She was my chosen family. We shared dinners, gardening tips, and the comfortable companionship of two women who'd learned that being alone was better than being with the wrong person. I'd redecorated the house, replacing furniture that carried too many memories of Frank with pieces that reflected my own tastes. The vegetable garden had expanded, and I'd added flowers, bright, colorful blooms that had no practical purpose except making me happy. The divorce settlement had protected my financial security and ensured Frank couldn't claim any portion of assets he'd tried to steal. More importantly, I'd learned that I was stronger and more capable than I'd ever imagined during 26 years of marriage. Yesterday, a woman from my book club asked me how I'd handled discovering my husband's betrayal. "How did you stay so calm," she wondered, "when your whole life was falling apart?" I thought about Richardson's envelope, those 3 words, 24 hours, and how they'd given me just enough time to choose between being a victim or being a survivor. I realized, I told her, that Frank's signature on those papers wasn't just evidence of fraud. It was evidence that he'd already left our marriage long before I knew it was over. The woman nodded, understanding in her eyes. So what did you do? I stopped trying to save something that was already gone, I replied, and I started building something new with what was left. As I spoke those words, I realized the truth they contained. Frank's 26 years of shared history, shared dreams, and shared deceptions had ended the moment he chose to forge my signature rather than have an honest conversation about our marriage. But his betrayal had also revealed my own strength, my own worth, and my own capacity to create a life based on truth rather than comfortable lies. I'd lost a husband, but I'd found myself. And myself, it turned out, was worth protecting.